Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Could I encourage you to take your seats, please? We have a very exciting session planned now for the end of day one, to lead us into the awards dinner, which will take place immediately after the end of today's proceedings. My name is Anthony Wood. I'm the Executive Director of the Council, and it's my absolute privilege to be sat at this table with 6 rock stars from the tall building industry. And these 6 people have been instrumental in the Council on Tall Building and Urban Habitats organization over the last 40 years. Not all of them for 40 years, I should add. As David mentioned this morning, we're very proud to be celebrating our 40th anniversary this year, and hopefully you've all seen the commemorative brochure that we've put together. And I think you'll see that a lot of that brochure is focused on Lynn Beadle. And I think you're going to hear from the guys this afternoon about how instrumental Lynn was in founding the council and some of the things that have gone on during that 40-year history. We're not going to go into long introductions. I think all the people here will be well known to you. We're going to do it in order of their chairmanship or involvement with the council. Possibly in order of seniority, but I'll let you decide that. I want to start with Leslie Robertson, who's well known to everyone, founder of Leslie Robertson Associates. Can you please put your hand together for Les?
Well, I guess I was chairman of the council, but my term of office was so long ago as to dull the memory of any but the most significant of events. Indeed, my memory focuses on but just one central remembrance. That's Professor Lynn S. Beadle. Lynn created the council and did so from nothing more than his own dreams, his own energies, and he dragged us, often kicking and screaming, into the far corners of the world, thus providing a sort of technological education or transference of information about tall buildings. In a way, that was typical of Lynn. He gently bulldozed us into creating the monographs, that stack of books that has turned up in many of the offices and classrooms of the world. He did so with a kind of gentle prodding, with both enthusiasm and grace. The truth of the matter is that my term, Lynn was the real chairman of the council. My role as the titular chairman was to nod in admiration of that which he accomplished. Being only modestly interested in assistance from me, Lynn was both the technical and the business leader of the council. With a staff eager, loyal, and talented, but scant in numbers, he carried a huge burden on his shoulders. Lynn explained this to me as being the result of financial limitations. While it's likely that these limitations were both real and serious, the essence of that burden was more likely associated with his desire to be involved in the smallest detail of the operations of the council. With military precision, Lynn outlined nearly all that came to the fore, thus allowing us to follow in his footsteps, filling in the missing pieces, if there were any. His 3-door filing cabinets must have been countless, containing papers, letters, slides, notes, everything. And travel was the story of his life. Leaving wife and daughter behind, it appeared that he accepted all of the countless speaking invitations that came his way. And those invitations were endless. When I wrote to Lynn, followed by a one-day visit to Lehigh, the both suggesting that on all future travel, he changed from his air reservations from coach to business class, he argued that it was too expensive, conceding only when I became insistent. But Lynn was a constant and consummate communicator. Every morning, Monday through Friday, as I turned on my computer, I knew that there would be a message from Lynn. On Saturday mornings, with few exceptions, he He telephoned to discuss this and that, some obscure issue. His messages were largely about the activities of the council, but strayed regularly into personal comments on family and friends. On the occasion of his annual holiday, the notes continued. I thought I'd get a vacation, but no luck. At the end of the holiday, there was always a little recap of the wonders of his days away from Lehigh and the council. At meetings of the council, and there were so many, in the evenings, Lynn preferred to be a bit of a loner. Always there was a good reason for not his joining us in revelry. It was not because others would exclude him. This was just his way. When I would chide him, he would give me a big smile and say that he had just too much on his plate. Anyway, Lynn's gentle manner and his smiling countenance were always present. A frown was unthinkable on his face. When times got a bit rough, particularly when he was forced to deal with my errant ways, his quick smile seemed to become broader and easier to surface. Professor Lynn S. Beadle, unmistakably the real chairman of the council, was my ideal of a perfect gentleman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Les, for those thoughts. I forgot to mention, by the way, that Les was chairman of the council from 1985 to 1990. Next up is Charlie DeBenedittis from Tishman Speyer, New York. Charlie was the winner of our Fazla Khan Lifetime Achievement Award in 2003 and a C2H Fellow in 2006. Could you please put your hands together for Charlie DeBenedittis?
Thank you and good afternoon. Proud to share the table with these with the chairman and past chairman and current chairman, but nonetheless I'm here. And those of us who are much older than 40 look back on those just achieving that milestone and say you've got a long way to go. However, when looking back over the council's 40 years, I marvel at the long way our industry has come in this relatively short period of time. I, as one of the few remaining who can recall Lynn Beadle's first conference in Bethlehem at Lehigh University in the summer of 1969, can reflect on where we were then versus where we are now. Those of us who spoke at that first conference may have used slides or an overhead projector, but we didn't have the graphics of a sophisticated PowerPoint presentation, nor had our information technology in those days evolved to the instantaneous transmission of computer-aided drafting files or even emails. The faxing of documents was yet to come. Handmade drawings were shipped and delivered by post and courier. Milestone advances similar to those in information technology have of course been made in engineering and architecture and in materials and methods over these years. Recently, I was asked to comment on a series of papers that posed the question, is the engineering and construction industry model broken? The suggestion was that it was broken, that its progress was incremental and not milestone, that the industry was not advancing in innovation and productivity in comparison to other industries that were more vertically oriented, such as automobiles, aircraft, and appliances, each with design, manufacturing, and sales all within one organization. Such vertical organizations, it was argued, foster greater advancement because their constituents, designers and manufacturers and sales, are aligned with the same product and have the benefits of a continuing team relationship year to year and product model to product model. My own observation is that our engineering and construction industry has in fact benefited by its horizontal organization, by the cross-collaboration that occurs when different architects, engineers, specialty consultants, builders, and developers come together as a new team on each project and provide a mix of experiences with many participating constituents from all over the world. It is also an industry with little opportunity for mass production building, although many standardized components can and are being mass produced. Perhaps the product of our engineering and construction industry does not compare as well in advancement, perhaps due to the fact that our products are very costly. They must have a long life, become part of a fixed environment, and cannot, without renovation, advance as other disposable products, which are declared obsolete and are driven off to be completely recycled to a new design. Sustainability demands will also require that our product be renovated and upgraded to increasingly higher standards rather than be replaced. Much of our expertise in the future will have to be directed to such existing product rather than to the more exciting opportunities of creating new buildings and new infrastructure. Of course, there will always be the opportunities, especially in less developed regions of the world, to create major developments and even new cities, but our challenge will be increasingly to upgrade our existing buildings and infrastructure to compete efficiently with such new developments. Lynn Beadle deserves our thanks for conceiving and implementing the idea of a global committee of tall buildings to function as a forum for knowledge transfer and exchange of best practices. Dr. Beadle's energetic leadership continued for 30 years until 1999. Many chairmen served the council and are listed elsewhere, but I must make mention of Dr. Faz Khan, who died much too young, soon after serving as chairman from 1979 to 1982. I will always remember the ovation he received in his sentimental closing at one of the 5-year council meetings in New York City at the end of his tenure. With the retirement of Lynn Beadle and going from Lehigh to here at Illinois Institute of Technology, it is Ron Klemencic who must be recognized for the dedication and vigor in revitalizing the council while relocating its headquarters here to Chicago in 2003. David Scott, our current dynamic and soon-to-be retired chairman, a couple of hours, I guess, has literally taken the council to new heights. And our dedicated staff must certainly receive our thanks, especially Jerry Kerry over the years for being a continuous thread throughout the organization. And now Anthony Wood, our relatively new thread, who, as a well-organized executive director of the council, has truly instilled and maintained its vibrancy. I'd like to leave you with a couple of questions to ponder. Where will our industry be in another 40 years? And despite the many advances that we have made in our industry, is there a necessity, and if so, how, to reshape the model of the engineering and construction industry to further stimulate innovation and productivity gains? I thank you for taking the time, and best wishes to all. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Next, we hear from Gilberto Valle, who was chairman of the council from 1993 to 1996. And Gilberto, many of you will know, hails from Sao Paulo, Brazil. Can you put your hands together, please, for Gilberto?
Dear colleagues, dear friends, you have received our reflections that are included with the papers of the Congress in the brochure. I will not repeat, but highlight 2 points on it. Before that, I should make a correction. that has been published. Gilberto do Valle is a Brazilian from Rio de Janeiro, not from São Paulo. And so I would like to invite you to be with us in 2016 for the Olympic Games. This photo has been done at the top of Sears Towers, just after I passed the gravel to Shankar Nair. You can see Lynn, Shankar, and me on the back, and all the press in the right side with many microphones there. By that time, Chicago community was disappointed with the fact that Petronas Tower has surpassed the height of Sears Towers with those pinnacles, and they could not agree with that. The council has just decided some hours before that should be considered 4 different ways to determine the height of the tallest buildings. The height to the structural or architectural top, the height to the highest occupied floor, the height to the top of the roof, and the height to the tip of spire or antennas. And so Sears Towers with the second and the third will be continue the highest in the world. At the press conference at the top of the tower, Lynn announced the decision, and the peace has been restored. At my time, our income in the council was very low, and we were not able to increase it. Lehigh University was all the time pressing us to put the accounts out of the red. Many plans have been made and presented to them in meetings with us. Lynn was always worried with that. I have had a meeting with my one of our vice chairmen of South America, Edson Musa, that is a very good friend of mine and live in the same city. And we have discussed that. And then I told to Lynn what the conclusion we have had. If Lehigh cannot support us, let us move from Lehigh, another university, and I am sure that we will have many interested in us. But for Lynn, it should be very difficult decision to take. He was from there, he found it all there. So we let the Lehigh keep the preoccupations with the money and go on with the work. After Shankar, Ron assumed the chairmanship, and I have influenced in it, and finally moved the council to here. Now is in great progress with David Scott, with many new members, the virtual journal, the monthly paper, the annual conference and awards dinner, and many others. He reestablished a staff, Tony Wood, the director, executive director, and with all that, the tall buildings are booming all over the world, mainly in Asia and Orient, but also in Europe and US. By now, the tallest, I think, is the Taiwan, and will be soon surpassed by Burj Dubai. Congratulations for all you that have contributed to this, and good luck to Sang Dai Kim that will command the council for the next 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilberto. Next, we'll hear from Shankar Nair, who was chairman of the council from 1996 to 2001 and is president of Teng & Associates here in Chicago. Can we have a hand for Shankar, please?
Thank you, Tony. My term as chairman of the council ended just weeks before 9/11/2001. And that's when the world of tall buildings was suddenly turned on its head. Now, of course, thoughtful people know that what happened that day was a security failure, not a building failure. And the lesson from 9/11 is not that we should build buildings differently, it is that we should keep criminals from flying airplanes into buildings. And it's obvious now, but at the time it didn't seem that obvious, at least to the public. And you might say that correcting that misperception gave the council, in a way, a sudden and very important reason to exist. But this was after my tenure. In the years leading up to 9/11, the challenge facing the council, the challenge that I had to face, was really to answer two questions. First, does the council have a reason to exist? Which might seem a ludicrous question to ask, but it was a question that was being asked by thoughtful people. And second, how do we manage after Lynn Beadle? Because you've heard from Charlie and others how critical Lynn was to the council. He was the council. Now, of course, these issues would have seemed very remote to me when I first got involved with the council, and that was in 1972, when I had my first experience with the council, and that was at Lehigh University, at the first Congress of the predecessor to the council. And before it was the council, it was known as the Joint Committee on Tall Buildings of IABSE and ASCE. And the conference was called Planning and Design of Tall Buildings. And skyscraper design seemed like a new and exciting field then. And I still remember, thanks largely to, I think, Lynn's doing, there was a certain spirit and enthusiasm to that event that I think would be a model for any conference on any subject. And in fact, I still remember the clam bake. I don't know if any of the others here were at that meeting, but that was one of the highlights, was a clam bake at Lehigh. Anyway, that was in '72. And I never imagined then in '72 that I would one day be chairman of the council, but I became increasingly active in the organization from the mid-1980s onward. And by that time, the council had been transformed into much more than just a structural engineering group. That's what it started as, but it became much more, and it was supposed to be. In fact, the tall building focus had been broadened to include not just the building itself, but also the habitat, the whole environment in which the building existed. And it had become recognized as an international and multidisciplinary group. In fact, it was the only international multidisciplinary group involved with tall buildings in the world. By 1977, when I became chairman, the technology of skyscrapers had advanced to the point that the why of tall buildings was at least as important as the how. We knew how to build skyscrapers of almost any size, shape, and form. The bigger question was whether we should. But the council's focus was perceived in the world, rightly or not, as being the nuts and bolts of skyscraper design and construction. And not really the broader issue of how tall buildings belong in the environment and in the world. So the challenge was to correct that perception, if the perception was correct, then to change the focus of the council. But the concern then was that there really were other organizations, bigger organizations, already doing that to some degree. And of course, an interesting sideshow throughout my chairmanship, peripheral actually to the council's mission, but of great interest to the public, was this issue of how to measure skyscraper height. I think we've heard some hints of that already. In fact, the Sears Tower, when I became chairman, had just lost its crown to Petronas as a result of rules under which spires count, and people thought maybe it shouldn't. And of course, to people who suggest that spires shouldn't count, I ask, well, would you not count the spire on the Chrysler building? It's such an integral part of the design, you can't imagine it without it. Of course, when these rules were made up, people didn't imagine that a designer or a builder would put on a spire just to achieve a higher official height. But anyway, all of that is sort of irrelevant now because Taipei 101 and soon Dubai are the tallest by any measure. Now, the other challenge facing the Council in the 1990s was beyond what it should do and whether it should exist, was the leadership transition. Now, the Council had many very illustrious chairmen before my time. You've heard a couple of them now. But the guiding spirit all along, again, as you've heard, was Lynn Beadle, the founding director. He was the Council. And after 30 plus years, the Council was so closely identified with Lynn that a Ctbuh without Lynn as its anchor was really hard to contemplate. And I won't go into the details, just to say that it was touch and go for a while as to whether we could really manage without Lynn. But thanks to the efforts of my successors, Ron Klemencic and David Scott, I believe the transition has been made very successfully now, and this organization is well positioned to go from strength to strength. Thank you.
Thank you, Shankar. Next, we hear from Ron Klemencic, who I'm sure many, if not all of you know in this room. He was chairman from 2001 till 2006 and is president of Magnuson Klemencic Associates in Seattle.
Thanks, Anthony. Let me first start off by saying what a complete honor and privilege it was to serve in the capacity I did with this organization. Sitting at a table with these gentlemen, I mean, I'm baffled by it, to just be at that table. These guys were my mentors, my teachers, people I respect immensely, and to not only sit at a table with them, but then to call them my friends is astonishing to me. And all of that is really because of Lynn Beadle. He brought us all together. He was an astonishing man, someone that had probably the most charisma that I've ever met. I'm sure there are presidents. President Obama, of course, is one of the most charismatic men in the world. But Lynn Beadle had that same kind of character that was very, very admirable, and he could get any of us to do just about anything at any moment. And later we wondered why we did it, but we did it because he asked. For those of you that haven't seen, a number of years ago, Mir Ali and a number of others had put together a book about Lynn Beadle. And if you haven't seen this book, I think Anthony could show you where it exists here in the library. I'll let you say that later. Anyway, he's talking about giving out free books, but I'll let that be his business. I never gave away anything for free. But anyway, it's a really captivating book. It's got a lot of anecdotal things in it, and I think in the spirit of Lynn Beadle, that's the rest of my comments are really going to be just anecdotal kind of memories, a walk down memory lane of my experiences with Lynn and with the council. Hopefully some of them you'll find humorous. My first interaction, or I guess not even interaction, my first introduction to Dr. Beadle was when I was a senior at Purdue University, and we were asked to do a senior design project. And I had been learning about concrete design and steel design and whatever. And there was this book that one of my professors gave me, Plastic Design of Steel Structures, written by Lynn Beadle. And I think I read this book probably 10 times, and I know I read it once, front to back in one sitting. I just was completely captivated by the technology that was embodied in this book, and I wondered who this Beadle guy was. And someday I hope to meet him. So I went through my senior design project, very much admiring the work that Dr. Beadle had done, but really not knowing much about the Council on Tall Buildings at that time, or really knowing much about Lynn Beadle. It wasn't until years later, and I think in the late 1980s, or possibly it was 1990, when it was the Hong Kong World Congress. And it was the first time I had any interaction with the Council on Tall Buildings. I was lucky enough to go off to Hong Kong and join in that conference, and I was just blown away by the kind of world luminaries that had assembled there. Structural engineers, architects, you name it, that were all the people that I held up as kind of heroes of our industry. And to kind of wander through the hallways as a pretty young guy at that point was totally amazing to me. And of course, in true Lynn Beadle style, I walked up to him, introduced myself, told him about the book, thought it was really cool. And before our conversation ended, and remind you, this is conversation number 1 I had with Lynn Beadle, Conversation number one, I had my membership card filled out for the Council on Tall Buildings. I was getting ready to write the check and send the money in, and he had me signed up for 2 different committees. And this was meeting number one, and that's how Lynn was. And I think my colleagues would remember all of this very fondly. As we went on, I got more and more active in the council through Lynn's proddings and what have you. And one of the more memorable early meetings that I was fortunate enough to attend included Les and Shankar, and I don't know if Charlie was there, I think Tom Fridstein was there, but it was the infamous Sears height meeting, and it was hosted in Shankar's office, as I recall. And we all locked ourselves in a room, and without getting to all the gory details, I remember one key part of that conversation, and it was Les actually that got up and explained to the group, I think remembering what Faz Khan's definition of height was, and then also pointed out that if we were to consider the antennas on top of Sears as part of height, then we should also consider those antennas on all the other buildings around the world. And in fact, the antenna on, I think it was World Trade Center Tower 2, was higher than Sears at that point. So either way, Sears was going to lose, whether the antennas were in or the antennas were out. We didn't report this to the press, of course, because no one wanted to hear that. Anyway, we went on to make our somewhat controversial decision, and the final blow there, as I left the meeting and got in the taxi cab to drive out to O'Hare, the taxi driver had the Chicago News Radio on, and they were reporting right at that time, as I'm sitting in the taxi, that this decision had been made, and the taxi cab driver just couldn't believe it. He goes, "Who are these pack of idiots that can't figure out how tall a building is?" Needless to say, I remained quiet. Yeah, who are those guys? Anyway, some of the other kind of fond memories I have that go well beyond the technical interactions that we've all gained from really are the friendships that we've all developed, that I've been able to develop, and opportunities that were given to me as participating in the conference or the council that are, tenfold more to my benefit than I ever gave the council, and I'm so thankful for that. One of the fond memories I had was after 9/11, a couple of days after 9/11, I had just taken on the chairmanship, as Shankar had pointed out. Of course, there's all the press going on, and my phone rings, and it's Nadine Post from E&R. And she reminds me, "You're the chairman of the Council on Tall Buildings. What are you going to do?" And I was so taken back by that. What am I going to do? What are we going to do as the council? And it was that phone call that inspired a whole bunch of activity in the ensuing months, leading to many meetings and ultimately some publications that the council put out. But it was kind of that prompting phone call from Nadine that really got the ball rolling. So it's a fond memory for me, and I definitely thank Nadine for kind of kicking me in the butt and getting us started on the right path there. Another good memory was a conference that we had in London, December post 9/11, so only 3 or 4 months after 9/11, and really interesting conversations because of the times that we were having. But the most notable thing was the keynote speaker for that conference. We were able to entice Prince Charles to come and speak to us, and we all wondered how that would turn out. It turned out that Prince Charles dislikes tall buildings immensely. And it was really good dialogue. He presented a very good case for his point of view. He was one of the most engaging speakers I've ever seen, in fact. And we all, at least maybe the American press, does him disservice because he's completely engaging and very well spoken. And I suppose if your job is to talk all day long to groups like this, that you get pretty good at it. But he was one of the better speakers I think we've ever had, and made a very good case, not against height for height's sake, but for the care and treatment of how those buildings meet the ground and that city experience, I think that Clark Manist was talking about in his presentation. So that was one of the more memorable presentations and things that I'd seen. At the same time, or in the same year, I guess, maybe a bit later, we had the honor of going to Taipei to crown Taipei 101, the world's tallest building. And there are several notable things that I remember about that trip, but the one that was most noticeable was the pride that not only the developer, but the mayor of Taipei and the president of Taiwan, who participated in these ceremonies, all had in that that outcome, that they had accomplished what they'd set out to. And I'll never forget riding in the Sky Lobby passenger elevator. They had just commissioned it, and the developer and the mayor of Taipei were showing off that they had set criteria for acceptance of the elevator, that if they took what was a Taiwan nickel and they stood it on its side on the floor of the elevator, and if we could ride the elevator from the bottom to the top and back down again without the nickel falling over, it was acceptable. And until it stood up, it was unaccepted. And so, of course, the elevator guys were quite traumatized by all this, but I saw it with my own eyes. We rode all the way up, all the way down. The elevator guy, I think it was Mitsubishi, they were sweating the whole time, but it worked. That was very memorable. And these things, you know, this is all folklore stuff that won't ever get written in a book anywhere, but it's quite funny. First experience with Anthony Wood. We found ourselves at a Council on Tall Buildings meeting in Malaysia, riding on the bus together, wondering who is this crazy chap from University of Nottingham talking about sky bridges that are linking buildings from one to the next. I don't remember the year. Do you recall the year? 2003, and just a few short years later, our paths reconnected, and lo and behold, here is Anthony leading us as executive director with extraordinary energy, and energy that is totally in line with that energy that Lynn Beadle had. And so we're in great hands moving forward with Anthony's work. And lastly, I can maybe just give you a brief story about how I snookered David Scott into taking on the chairmanship. We were planning a conference in New York, and I was soliciting sponsorships from organizations, and I was actually speaking with one of David's colleagues, Nancy Hamilton, who was running their Chicago office at the time, and I was telling Nancy, well, ARAP is a very large organization. Surely you have lots of money to donate, and surely you want to be the primary sponsor of this. And so Nancy took it away for a while and came back to me a week or two later and said, well, the powers that be have debated this and come back with a proposition, and the proposition is we'd be happy to be a top-level sponsor and provide you with some funding, but we want to, ARAP, take a more active role in the Council on Tall Buildings. Well, what she didn't know was about that same week, I'd gotten a phone call from Shankar saying, you've been chairman for 5 years, I think it's time we think about transition, and I wholeheartedly agreed. It'd been a long haul. So about the same time, it was this serendipity of Nancy thinking, well, ARAP wants to take a more active role, and we've got a particular person, David Scott, who would like to serve in some leadership capacity. I said, well, I have just the job for him. And we sat down in a hotel room in New York and hammered out the details, and David took over shortly thereafter, and it was just great, serendipitous happening, very, very timely. And I think the proof is in the pudding here that David really has taken the council from kind of what I described the other day as the little infant child that I handed him, and he's gone through the teenage years now, going through the hormonal rages and the physical growth spurt, and now he's handing Professor Kim a young adult to take forward and make it even better. So with all of that, in the spirit of Lynn Beadle and the kind of anecdotal, very charismatic guy he was, I offer that. Thank you so much for the opportunities that I've had to serve this organization, and look forward to seeing you all for many years to come, but in a less than leadership capacity. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Ron. And the final speaker in this session is our current chairman for, as several people have said, including David himself, about another 4 hours or so, and that's David Scott, who's been chairman since 2006 and is the principal of ARAP New York.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here in my waning hours of my chairmanship of the council, and to tell you a little bit about how much I've enjoyed it. Unfortunately, I'm the first chairman, I guess, that did not know Lynn Beadle very well, and I guess it's a movement of the times. But Ron, as he said, has learned very well from Lynn, because it was that conversation number one when I had been following the council since I started working in Arup, looking through the books, trying to understand how the hell do you design these buildings? And in conversation number one with Ron, he said, well, come on up to my hotel and let's talk about, you really want to get involved in the council, don't you? And he said, he invited me to join the executive committee, and then I think it was a month or so later, he said, well, we're looking for a new chairman, and why don't you put your plan together for what you could do? And I, along with some others, submitted an application, and here I am. And what a great organization it is. Yesterday we met 53 leaders, all passionate about tall buildings, architects, engineers, developers, suppliers. And what momentum we have at the moment, we had a great deal of conversation. We split up into groups, talking about working groups that are very active. And why are they active? Because to some extent, we don't know what we're doing with tall buildings. And that is the reason that we exist, is to try and understand the traditions that have basically been embedded in all codes and all the way we work. It's understanding that and actually understanding reality. And in recent years, there's been an incredible jump in knowledge of understanding of how buildings really work. And the council is determined to try and grasp that knowledge and disseminate it to our members. So we talked about working groups. We've got very active groups in many different fields in tall buildings, and I won't go through them all, but sustainability, fire, wind, there's a lot going on. Country leaders, we're talking about setting up several new organizations in new countries where there is a lot of building work, but not many organizations that can bring the professionals together to discuss what they're doing and how they're doing it. And then new developments. Many different ideas of how the council can be more relevant. And Professor Sang-Dae Kim, who will be taking over the chairmanship of the council in 4 hours, who's sitting in the middle on the right-hand side. He was elected under a very incredibly strong agenda to develop the council in Southeast Asia, to make it what it is in America in Southeast Asia. And if he manages to achieve half of what his plan is to achieve, it will be incredibly successful for the council. So he is my successor, and I'm very pleased with that choice. When I was elected, I was asked to put together a plan, and my term being 3 years, I thought, okay, I don't want to fail, so I'll make a 5-year plan. So everything that I do in the first 3 years is the successful bit, and what I don't do, well, that must have been the 2 years after. And one of the first things we did was appoint Anthony, and I'm really going to miss my raging arguments with Anthony on many different subjects. But it's because we were both passionate about what the council is about and what we're trying to do. And I think that together we have managed to achieve a lot. And I'm confident that together as we go forward, we will achieve even more. And what a great organization it is. Yesterday, we made the Trump Tower 26 feet taller. Although not formally and officially yet, but Peter Weissmantel and the Height Committee agreed the wordings of what the new base of the building should be. And as soon as we can agree what the top of the building should be, we will know how tall the building is. A little bit of a way to go, and still it's, we locked ourselves in a room last May, about 20 of us, arguing about how tall buildings should be and where you measure them. And when I came back and explained to my kids, well, this is how we're going to measure buildings for the time being, and they go, you know, what are these guys playing at? It is tricky. We have got a good set of rules at the moment, but with the Burj Dubai, and when it becomes a building in our books, because it's still a construction site, it needs to be open for business before we recognize it as a building. That's going to change the whole landscape of tall buildings, and perhaps some readjustment is appropriate, and the Council is certainly looking at that under our Height Committee. So I think that we should do one last thing. We should invite Professor Kim to come on stage because he is the future of the Council. Professor Kim, can you come up and join us a minute? Totally ad hoc. Sorry, Anthony, he doesn't like these unplanned things, but can you please come up? And I do this because I argued I'm not past chairman. I'm not going to speak with my very sort of with my fellow colleagues. But Anthony convinced me that, in fact, I should do. And I have to say that Ron has been an incredible mentor for me as I took over from him. And I hope that I can be a mentor for Professor Kim as he takes over from me. And this evening, I will be formally handing the gavel over. But please welcome Professor Kim. And maybe you could say just a couple of words.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. David Scott, and I'm very honored to be here as the next chairman. And also, I respect my former chairman of this council, and I have several goals in mind. I'll tell you at the this evening's award dinner, but I'm not going to tell you right now. But I have a couple of things I'm concerned about: Council's financial stability. Also, I'm going to bring many academic people to our council, also many experts from Asia, so that will be my part of goals during my 2 years tenure. And I'll work hard, but I'm expecting your continuous support for the next 2 years. Thank you very much. I'll do my best. Thank you.